I always pray that my prayer every morning is that God would not only use me, but he helps me see people as he sees them, and that he would help me love people better and him more. And when we put on that mentality, I feel like even the hard conversations and even when we mess up, we can be encouraged that God's still working.
Hey, friends, it's Abdu Murray, and I'm coming to you with another segment of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, which, as you know by now, hopefully, is a series of short videos where I, along with an apologist, an evangelist, someone who does this kind of stuff for a living, who speaks publicly and writes on apologetics and evangelistic issues, comes and joins me for a short segment where we talk about times when we coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently, whether it's in a personal conversation, it's even correspondence with somebody, or something from the stage or during a Q&A. And the point of this is to show you that you don't have to be a professional to get involved in the apologetics and evangelism game. You can do it because we make our mistakes as well, and we learn from our mistakes. Well, joining me today on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda is my good friend Jon Noyes. Jon is a speaker and writer with Stand to Reason. You've likely already seen a couple episodes of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda where other folks like Greg Kokel and Alan Schleman are on. They're part of the great Stand to Reason team. I've had a long-standing relationship with those folks, and they do wonderful work. Go to str.org to find out more about what Stand to Reason does in general and find out what Jon Noyes does in specific. And so it's truly an honor and a pleasure to have you on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, brother.
Oh, it's really great to be with you. Thank you. I love this concept.
Yeah, well, thanks, man, for being a part of it. So you do got to be vulnerable when you're on this thing, because you got to give us a time when you sort of either majorly or minorly botched it or could have done it better. I'm not going to interrupt your story. Just want to get I might pull some nuggets out of you here and there. So why don't you give us a little bit of your, if you could for a moment, just familiarize the audience a little bit with your own backstory, because you weren't always a Christian. You weren't raised in a Christian environment, or at least didn't come to faith in a Christian environment. Give us like the 1-minute version of your story, and then why don't you share with us a time when you coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something different?
Yeah, absolutely, Abdu. I didn't grow up in any type of faith tradition. Now, we weren't anti-faith, but my home, we didn't talk about God. It just wasn't. He wasn't. It's like he didn't exist ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
And I blossomed and bloomed through high school and college into a really vociferous atheist. And then my story, I say, starts as all good stories do with I met a girl out of college. I was working at a law firm out here in Los Angeles, and I met a girl. She eventually said that she was a Christian, which I thought was the worst thing in the world, because I thought Christians were stupid. And but she was fun, and she was really attractive, and she was really, really smart, and we got to know each other. Eventually, I started looking actually into my own worldview and realized that my own worldview of naturalism couldn't explain some fundamental features of reality. The existence of stuff, the existence of a moral depth to reality, and the existence of the soul. And then I started looking into the resurrection of Jesus, and kind of all of these things combined with some key relationships. I eventually, I say I came to the conclusion that the Christian worldview was the true story of reality, but that makes it sound like it was all rational and intellectual. There was definitely heart transformation. And of course, sure, the Holy Spirit works in us and converts us. We don't do it on our own, just studying, but the studying really pointed me not only to the truth of the Christian worldview, but to where my worldview of naturalism fell short. Yeah. And and that kind of leads perfectly into what you're talking about, because I remember having so much pressure on me when I first came on to Stand to Reason, trying to compete in quotes, compete with these guys, like the guy names that you just mentioned, like Greg Kokel and Alan Schleman, and I remember thinking, like, I can never do as well as them, and I'm not saying that I do as well as Greg, especially. I mean, he's a true pro, but that pressure that we put on ourselves sometimes prevents us from actually moving into the conversations that matter most with people.
Yep.
And if we're asking for like a story, man, I've got I've got so many coulda, woulda, shouldas, like in my broader life, but then in the context of my vocation at Stand to Reason. So I speak mostly, not mostly, a lot of my talks are on suicide. It's a talk that I've been giving for 4 years now since joining Stand to Reason, and it's just a topic of interest around the world now. So
Yeah.
a lot of the times when somebody brings me in to speak, that's what they have me speak on. So it's a heavy topic, and so I was given this talk to a sold out audience, hundreds of teens and leaders and parents, and I was rolling, I was feeling it, I was doing really, really great. And then the last bit of advice, like you get the facts out of the way, you get the real depth of the presentation out of the way, and then the last 10 or 15 minutes are meant to be very, very practical. How can we move towards this issue? Mm-hmm. And man, I completely forgot every point. I mean, like I had like there's three fundamental principles. One, you're not alone. 2, you have to talk to somebody. 3, you have to talk to somebody. So there's actually only 2 points, and they're really, really important. Yeah. And man, I blew it. I mean, I blew it so bad. Like I did really well at the presentation, and it comes to the practical portion, and I'm standing there, and it's not even that I forgot them. I just like kept talking about other stuff. And this is where it gets really important, because you start saying, well, what do you do? What do you do if you or a friend or a loved one is wrestling with suicide? You know, how can you help this? And you go through the evidence or the indications that somebody might be wrestling. And then you say, what do you do? Normally it's in me. I know the conversation by heart. You know, you say you have to do something really hard. It's not profound. It's not complicated. You have to do something really hard. You have to talk to somebody. Yeah. And I completely forgot it. And it's like, all I did is kept just blabbering on and on and on. And I remember getting off the stage, like thinking immediately, knowing that I forgot to say like one of the most important parts, and really wishing I could have that time back. Like really, really wishing I could just like, oh, wait, hold on 1 second. Let me get back up on the stage. Well, that time was gone. You know, it's gone. But just to encourage your listeners or viewers here, Abdu, and you can relate to this. I know you can, especially just the career that you've had and the question and answers, like blowing these things. It was really cool because that day I remember distinctly 2 students who came up to me. I picture their faces in my mind perfectly. They came up to me explaining how this talk really, really helped them, not for in a friend's life, but in their own life. One of them told me, she literally said, I'm so glad I came to this talk because I was going to kill myself tomorrow morning. Yeah, and she had a plan, and she had she knew when, where, and how. She says, my parents are going to be at church. I have enough pills. I know I do to kill myself. I've researched this. And I just wanted to go, when my parents left, I was just going to go crawl back in the bed and go to sleep forever. And she said, but now I realize there's hope. You know, so while I didn't reiterate my like 2 major points, she understood my first point is there's hope, you know, and she got that. And this has nothing to do with me, Abdu. I know that it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the glory of God and where people find themselves when they hear things. But even in the midst of me severely messing this talk up, in my mind, it was a severe mess up. It really was. It still saved lives, which is like literally, which is really, really amazing that God can still use us. And that's just a reminder, you know, that's just a reminder that sometimes we kind of just got to get ourselves out of the way and just allow God to use us, even in our mess ups, you know, even in our foibles and our fallings short. And we have to remember, I find a lot of comfort in this. Like Jesus already like preached the perfect sermon and did the perfect evangelism and lived the perfect life so that we don't have to. And the coolest thing is that even in in where we mess up, the Holy Spirit still uses it in ways that we can't even imagine. And that's only my experience is just one of, gosh, I can think off the top of my mind a half dozen right now of similar times when I've done similar things, whether it be on a stage or just talking to my mom or my brother or my sister. None of them believe. And you let the pressure kind of get to you and you forget what you're supposed to say, but it's okay because God still uses it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
interesting you say that, John, because couple of, I mean, there's a lot of things to pull out of that. One of which I think is important. I've heard you and Greg and others speak on this, and you just given us a living example of when it's actually happened. Is that oftentimes when we're in a situation, whether it's from a public platform, which creates its own pressure, or just an intense emotional conversation with someone who you want to see saved, and that creates its own pressure as well. Is that one you can blather on because you're sort of caught up in the moment and you can't stop yourself. It's like, how do I put the brake on? And you realize you're doing it and you're still not stopping. Um, and I've been guilty of that. Or it's I need to be impressive, or whatever it is happens, and then you walk away, and you can, and with personal relationships, you can get it back. Yours is
yeah,
actually really interesting because you're on a platform where we're not making new time. Time is a commodity of which they do not make more.
that's
And
right.
so when you lose that time on a platform like that, the pressure's even a little higher because that audience is you're done with that talk. And maybe you'll see somebody in the hallway, maybe you'll see somebody after like you did, and God rewards you. He gives my friend Stuart McAllister often says that when you think you've blown it, God will give you a rose and say, "Don't worry, I'm okay. I'm good. I got it. It's not because of you anyway." Um, but there's that sense of like, I'll never get that back again. And maybe there's a kid in the back of the room I'll never talk to. Who knows? Um, uh, but the point is here, I think that there is a burden that's relieved. And like I said, I've heard you guys talk about this before, is that our responsibility is not relieved. Our responsibility to preach the gospel, our responsibility to be faithful witnesses and stewards of this gospel message. But the burden of thinking that you're the one who saves someone, that
Yeah,
is relieved, which is liberating. Because if your story gives encouragement to anybody for anything, and it does for me, it's that you can walk off not having said the most important thing you wanted to say, and somehow God still says that thing to the person. So friends, don't feel like you have to get it right 100% of the time. Try your best to do that. Prepare yourself as best as you can, but God will use the moment as well. John just shared with us a great story about that. Thanks for sharing that, bro. I really appreciate it, man.
oh, it's my pleasure, man. There's so many. I love
Yeah.
what you just said because the pressure, we put so much pressure, especially like this was an example from a big stage,
Hmm.
especially when there are those intimate one-on-one conversations with people that you really care about.
Yeah.
But we don't have the power of life and death. Only God
Right.
does. We don't have the
Mm.
power to resurrect anything, but God does. So if we could just trust God, trust Him in our intellect, trust Him in our positioning where He puts us, and just allow ourselves to be moved, and to be moved by Him towards people. I always pray that my prayer every morning is that God would not only use me, but He helps me see people as He sees them, and
Mm.
that He would help me love people better and Him more.
Mm.
And when we put on that mentality, I feel like even the hard conversations and even when we mess up, we can be encouraged that God's still
Yeah.
working.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, hey, thanks, brother, for being on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda. Friends, do check out what John is doing at Stand to Reason. Go to str.org. Look up his name. It's spelled Noyes. I'm sure we'll have a graphic that's correctly pronounced, spells his name. John's a gifted communicator on very important topics like suicide, for example, which is an issue we can't afford to ignore. We just simply can't afford to ignore it. And it's got incredible depth in terms of he's got incredible depth in terms of the biblical basis from which he approaches this, and the research and the facts that bring it here. But you also make it very personal. So thanks for what you're doing, brother, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yep.